Good morning, everyone, and it is morning now. I finally did get up and decided to do a morning video. I have to have my jacket on. It's still a little cool. These are the changing times where in the morning it's cold, you need a jacket, and in the afternoon you can go out in a tank top. Now, I probably will never do that for you, but maybe a short sleeve shirt like I had yesterday. In any case, there are so many lies being spread right now. It's hard to decide which one to attack first, or whether we should just ignore them and go on. The problem is the lies are influencing people of the world, and we've got to get the truth out there so that they have a chance to make the right decision. People are making decisions entirely based on lies. They're killing people based on lies. The people instigating it should be arrested and caused with accessory to murder, but they're not going to have that happen, not in a world run by the devil. It's too bad to watch what used to be people trying to do the right thing to now nobody cares whether they do the right thing or not. It's all about me. Me, 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 me. And I'm not practicing to sing. So we're going to talk a little bit about Israel. I've mentioned it briefly in different videos that the Palestinians have no claim at all to the land. None. Zero. Not even 1/10 of an amount. Nothing. Palestinians basically is a variation of another word, but it doesn't matter the origin. They don't have claim to the land. The Jews have lived there for thousands of years. They were given the land by God. But it's a combination of Satan ruling this particular religion, and it started probably with sibling rivalry because the Jews and the Arabs are related, Ishmael and Isaac, but it's gone well beyond that. There have been wars in this area from the beginning of time. Satan's been there doing his damnedest, literally, to cause trouble. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick verse, Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show thee. Your elders, and they will show thee. People that are alive now that are old know what it was like a few decades ago. Not thousands of years, but a few decades. And we can be very precise on what happened during those decades. Some can't, but some can. So we can be witnesses to tell you. Now, I wasn't alive in 1948 when Israel became a nation once again after 2,000 years. There was always a Jewish presence there. They didn't all leave when they were forced to leave in 70 AD. A lot of them stayed. Arabs and Jews worked together. If they used the term Palestinian or Philistine, Palestinian, they were thought of both under that title. But we're going to look at some dates and we're going to see kind of how things got started. The land of Israel, Eretz Ishmael, has been around for a long time. We can look at the time that maybe they were divided. It became Israel and Judah. Judah is where we get the term Jew, shortened version of it. We can talk about that, but that's part of the history. So let's take a look, and we're going to go back and we're going to see what originally happened. They were saved by Joseph and lived in Egypt. So they were in the general area. But Abraham was told that they would have their own land, and your people would multiply and God would bless them. So we're not there yet. But to get them out of Egypt, because they'd become very used to it, that's the problem with people, is we get used to things. God had to get them out of there, so he brought in a tyrant to overwork them and make them wish they lived someplace else. Moses gets them out. They send spies into the promised land to see if they can go there. And most of the spies came back and said, no, they're too powerful, God could never handle it, we're not going. God being put out by that, knowing that he's God and can do anything he wants, and they didn't have the faith, he said, okay, well, you're just going to wander the desert. So they did for 40 years until that generation of doubters died off. Moses with them the whole time. God's taking care of them, feeding them, giving them water, whatever they needed. Lots of people. Eventually, they get to go to the promised land. Now, Moses messed up, got mad at God, and God punished him by not letting him lead the people into the promised land. Joshua had to do that. And he took over the mantle, and he parted the sea to get in that area. By the time they got there, the people there already had heard about him. And they were afraid of him, and many of them left. Now, how do we know all this stuff is true? Archaeologists have been covering Israel, which is the size of New Jersey. It's not very big. And all this attention is in this one area. Each of the countries that surround it have more land in themselves than Israel does. They should be able to live in peace, but Satan doesn't want God to have peace. God is very patient with Satan. If he can be patient with Satan, he can be patient with us. So thank God for that when you think about it. So they found a lot of things. We found cities that were talked about in the Bible that people said, well, there's no proof. Well, we've got proof. Israel, unfortunately, and Jerusalem have similar problems in that there's been thousands of years of building and tearing down and building and tearing down. And it's hard to know where you're at. So they have to find things like pottery and other things that will tell them what generation this is from. But they have done that. The actual streets that Jesus walked on are well below the current streets. You can get the feel of it by walking on the current streets, but if you want to see what they're like, you take a tour down below. Because it's been destroyed. Israel has been an example to the world of how not to be. They were supposed to be an example of how to be a godly person. But they've shown us how to fail multiple times. So we have a history of the Jews being in the area from a little while after their escape from Egypt. Pretty much from then on, there's been some momentary conquering, but they've come back because nobody else wanted it. Until Israel really got in there and started developing it, it was a godforsaken place. Nobody wanted it. The only thing that it had going for it was a road that connected Egypt and Africa with Asia and wherever else you go. That's the only thing it was really known for. So let's take a look at our timeline. Most of our history is about the 17th century BC is where it starts. Abraham and the patriarchs are back at that time. They're not really in Israel yet. They're in the general area. We know Lot was around the sea, the Dead Sea, with Sodom and Gomorrah. We know that Abraham and Lot split and went different ways because they had too many people each. The 13th century was when the escape from Egypt happened. BC, 13th century BC. Remember, things count down. So 17th century Abraham, 13th century the escape from Egypt. They got the Ten Commandments between the 13th and the 12th century. Part of that wandering in the desert stuff. In Israel, in around 1000 BC, they appointed their first king. God didn't want them to have a king, but the other countries around them did, and they wanted a king so they would feel better. Pride, their downfall, time and time again. So that was about 1020 BC, and then Jerusalem was made the capital of David's kingdom around 1000. They built their first temple, 960 BC. This stuff was a long time ago. And we've got archaeological proof of most of this, direct proof. Other places they've got writers, the Bible talks about a lot of this stuff. The Bible is not only Word of God for instruction, but it's also a history book. In 930 BC is when their troubles really started. They had different ways that they thought they were going to worship God. So they split, became Israel to the north, Judah to the south. Israel had a problem. They didn't have a temple. And the Mosaic Law said that they have to sacrifice at a temple. So they built a mock one just so they could do what they think they're doing up there, but it didn't have the ark. It wasn't part of the deal. And they were the first to be conquered. Judah hung on a little bit longer. But eventually, they were exiled out around 586 BC when Judah was conquered by the Babylonians, and they were all hauled away because they wouldn't follow God's rules. Plain and simple. God's given them some rules of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to let the land lie fallow for a little while. Their Shemitah years, and they wouldn't do it. So God took the punishment out in payment by making them be exiled for 70 years. Eventually, they get to go back when the new Babylonian king gets conquered, and he lets them go back and restore their temple. Now, it was never going to be as good, but that's kind of the way things are when you destroy something and you go back. So from 538 BC to 142, it was part of the Persian Hellenistic time period. And 538 to 515, many of the Jews came back, but a lot of them stayed in Babylon. So I'm doing a quick history lesson for you. That's why when the wise men came from the east, they were probably Jewish astrologers who knew about the king's sign and all the things to go with the birth of Christ. Knew about the Messiah, keeping it in Hebrew. Around 332, it was conquered by Alexander the Great, 32 BC. And then it became under Hellenistic rule around 166 BC. Now, they didn't like being captive. The Jews didn't. And the Maccabean revolt, or Hasmonean revolt, happened. And the temple was basically destroyed. That was in 70 AD. And we have Christ in there, and he came down during occupation time. He didn't pick a perfect time. So all these things are happening. Roman rule basically went to about the time of Jesus, and then shortly thereafter they started losing control. Caesar was letting Rome burn. Now, Jesus' ministry is from roughly 20 AD to 33 AD. The calendars were all calculated wrong initially. They calculated using Gregorian calendars instead of Hebrew calendars and some other things, but roughly at that time was Jesus' time here. There was no Christian church prior to Jesus. Understand that. It was all Jewish prior to that. And Jesus was Jewish. All of his disciples were Jewish. You don't throw the Jews out. God never did. Replacement theology is a sin. So don't be part of it. Okay. The last stand for the Jews in Israel would have probably been, I think it's around 73 AD, and that was when they did their stand on Masada. Masada was a big mountain in the area. Herod had a temple there, and they got up on the top, and they laid siege there, and the Romans tried for a long time to get them out of there, and they couldn't. They finally built a dirt ramp all the way to it. It took them a long time, but they were surviving up there because they planned on that, which is what you got to be doing today, is to be planning on some kind of a siege, because we're going to get it yet. Anyhow, when the Romans finally got to the top, they found that the Jews living up there all committed suicide. Men, women, and children. They didn't want to become captive of these Romans, because they knew what the Romans did. The Romans hung Jesus on a cross. They had cruel punishments. Okay, so we get from 300 AD to around 630 BC, AD, the Byzantines ruled the area. And the Talmud and the Mishnah talk about this. They were completed around 390. So we've got historical written record of it too. And then from 636 to around 1100 AD, it was under Arab rule. The first and second temples of Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock, built by the Caliph at the time, were built during these times and destroyed a few times because of earthquakes. The Crusaders came in 1100 to around 1300 and took everything back, but they couldn't hold it, so they gave it up somewhere around 1300. And around 1500 to 1900, it became the Ottoman rule or empire, part of it. All this stuff is happening, but the Jews are only out for a little while. And that's basically from Christ till they become a nation. It's the only time they're out. And that's the church age. So they didn't become the focus of God. He focused all of his attention on the church. And of course, the church has splintered and gone off in all different crazy directions. But the focus was no longer on Israel. So that didn't mean it was up for grabs. It just means that, once again, the Jews had to be punished for their disobedience. But leave that to God. That's entirely God's realm. We shouldn't be doing it. So anyhow, they started coming back slowly in the 19th century, and they started putting kibbutzes in there, and they got British occupation in there for a while, and they allowed them to come back again. The British called it the Jewish national home in Palestine, because the Romans, when they kicked them out in 70 AD, called the land Palestine, because they didn't want the Jews to ever come back. But nobody took it. Nobody wanted it, not really. So there's a number of things that happen back and forth. I'm going fast through this because I'm already reaching my daily limit on a video. A lot of things were set up and done, but it wasn't really a country. But everybody knew that they wanted to be there. Jews came there a lot of times, but they were killed sometimes. They were massacred. Some of the Arabs, we've got two basic factions of the Muslim religion, which formed around 600 AD, the time of Muhammad. And I've got into that before, and I'm not going to cover that on this talk. But the two factions split, the Shiites and the Sunnis, and they've got different views. Well, the Jews have their different views too. The Sadducees and the Pharisees. Satan loves to get in and divide. He's really, really good with that. So anyhow, we know that we had a bunch of wars in here, and fighting was always going on in the general area because it is a thoroughfare. But in 1944, or 43 I guess it was, they started really pushing the prison camps in Germany. And when we finally captured the area and found all these people there, the world had to, absolutely had to, stand behind the Jews because nobody had ever done that to anybody before. 7 million Jews were killed. Now they killed 7 million other people, which can include Christians, anybody with a disability. If you weren't the perfect Aryan race, you were included in that. So they didn't ever want to have that happen again. So they got together. The United Nations actually was a working body of good people. They got together and agreed that they should be a nation. And they did that in 47. And it took them a year, basically, to put together a government. So in May of 1948, they became a government. And, of course, they immediately had their War of Independence because the Arabs didn't want to be part of that. So they got an armistice signed, and Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Jerusalem divided up so that they all took part in it. They kind of all lived there before anyway, so it was not a big deal then. And their first Knesset was elected in 49. So immigration started. And if you look at Jerusalem today, look at some modern pictures. It's a modern, thriving city. There's farming going on all over the place. It's a luscious land. It's the land of milk and honey now. Milk and honey are the things that you get as a byproduct of allowing nature to do its thing. It didn't say steak and potatoes or steak and corn or things that you got to cut down or kill. Milk and honey, you can passively live on that. John the Baptist lived on honey and locusts. Locusts are a form of protein. Now, I haven't done that, but I have fasted on peanut butter and honey to get the protein and the sugar. So, all this is going on, and then the rest of the world has to get involved. And they come up with the idea of Palestine. We've got to have our own state. Do you notice that none of the Arab nations contributed any land? It had to come from Israel. The faction that didn't want Israel to exist came up with that idea and started promoting it and sharing it. And as long as it didn't impact the other countries, they didn't care. We don't really, have anything against Israel, they said, but as long as it doesn't come from us. So they started trying to carve it up. And then they had another war in 67, because Jerusalem wasn't even part of this initially. And they took the land that Jerusalem was on. So instead of everybody kind of sharing it, it became part of Israel. And they should never have allowed Jordan access to the Temple Mount. But they didn't think they were ever going to go back there, because the problem that Israel has, and it's the reason that they're going to get 2 witnesses and 144,000 evangelists, Jewish evangelists, is because they don't believe their history. The Jews that are there for safety, quote unquote, but they don't believe, a lot of them don't believe in God. A lot of them are just plain atheists. How could God allow us to be scattered the way he did? I hate God, whatever. Things like that they start saying. And they've been back, they haven't stopped the Palestinian movement because they don't believe that there's anything there. If you don't believe in God, you don't believe in the devil. And that's been their problem. But They're going to find out. Okay, well, they've tried multiple times to create a Palestinian state. Multiple times. And each time it's been turned down because the only way that they want a Palestinian state is with the 100% destruction of Israel. They don't want Israel to exist. They don't want the Jews to have a homeland. Kill them all off, wipe them off the face of the earth, and then we can make it Palestine. That's what they want. You can't negotiate with anybody like that. Now, I know I covered this stuff really fast. I apologize for that. There are timelines you can look at. There's plenty of proof, both eyewitnesses and written account and archaeological evidence that these places exist. They know where Masada is. They've excavated that area. They know where Jerusalem was and is. They're finding things as they dig through there. The Ark of the Covenant is probably buried in some place, some cavern underneath the Temple Mount, because we haven't been able to find it. Nobody's got it. I know a church in Africa claims they have it, but they won't let anybody see it. You don't have something if you won't let somebody see it. And look at it, not touch it. They could have let somebody in, but they won't. We can make them. We can make copies. We've made copies for movies. So it's possible that the Antichrist might make a copy. But it's also possible the real one is there someplace. And it would be nice to be able to find the real one, because it's supposed to have manna in it. And the broken original tablets of the Ten Commandments that God wrote. Moses had to rewrite them. God wasn't going to do it again. So you see, the history is being rewritten by those that don't like the history. They want to remove Jews from all written records. You see what they did in our country, where they took down people that were big at the time. Take down a statue of George Washington? Why? What did he do to you? Nothing. They're trying to keep things stirred up, and they remove history so they can rewrite it. If you remove all forms of history, then you can rewrite it any way you want. And that's what they're trying to do, so that the people that take over won't have a reason to not follow these so-called leaders. Don't worry, they won't have power for very long. And don't try to fight them, because you won't win. Because if you fight them on your own, you're fighting for Satan to win. Fight them only if God asks you to, and he probably won't. Defend yourself, yes. But don't be part of an offense, because you're not going to shut it down. This is 15 minutes of fame for Satan. He's going to get locked away for 1,000 years, and then he's going to be thrown into a pit of fire. His future is not very good. So he's going to take this 15 minutes of fame and use it to its fullest, and you can't stop it. Pray that it doesn't affect you until we're out of here. That's about all you can really do. You can have revivals, but they're going to stop when the rapture happens. But that's okay. We should have revivals every day. We should restore our hope and faith in God every day. Don't worry about it. It's going to be all right. Till we meet in the clouds. God bless.